Hello adventurers and welcome to the club. Today we're doing another reaction video because, well, it's bad outside, it's dark, and yeah. This one is with a girl doing bushcraft things. Perfect. Okay, let's start.
Something that I think there's a lot of confusion about in terms of survival is what people think your survival priorities should be. And most people would say water because we know that we absolutely can't survive without water. But from the point where you admit to yourself that you're in trouble to the point where you really start needing water to stay alive, a lot of things can happen. So I'm going to discuss what I think your survival priorities should be based on the situation that you're in and how you can prioritize your needs yourself. I'm Clarice, welcome to the Live Ready channel.
Okay, the intro. Ferrite rod for survival, and not a good idea.
So as I alluded to at the introduction of this video, your survival priorities are going to be different depending on the situation that you find yourself in. So the very first thing you're going to have to do is to get yourself or anybody who's with you out of the vicinity or out of the area of whatever threat you're moving away from. So if that means that there's a fire or there's a predator in the environment, or you're just in a dangerous area, you're going to need to move out of that area first. Secondly, if there are any wounds or any injuries that need treating immediately, this is very hot and it's far away from me. If there are any injuries, severe injuries that need to be treated right away, then treat the injuries right away. So in my opinion, that would be priority number one, is to get yourself out of mortal danger or immediate danger.
Yeah.
So for example, if you have an arterial bleed, that's going to be your first priority because you're not going to survive longer than a couple of minutes with something like that. So treat the wound or treat the injury. And the same goes for if you're traveling in a group of people and you've got to survive as a group. The first thing that you're going to look at in the group is anybody injured? Or is the group in mortal danger? Is there a predator around? Is there, I don't know, maybe the terrain is presenting some or the other sort of threat to you. So once your life is absolutely not threatened anymore and you can find a safe place to sit down, take a moment to breathe, think about the situation that you're in, you can now consider what the rest of your priorities are. And it's important to note that your priorities, your immediate survival priorities and your long-term survival priorities are going to be slightly different. You still need the same things to survive, but for long-term survival there's a different consideration, and I'll get to it a bit later in this video. So first, a lot of people on the survival skills courses say priority number one should be water. And yeah, you do need water, but it's again going to depend on the situation that you find yourself in. So for example, if you're in an extreme cold environment, your first need probably is not water. If you've got snow around, then you don't have to prioritize finding water. What you need to prioritize then is thermoregulation. And that's going to go with building a shelter or finding shelter of some sort, getting yourself out of the way of the elements. So wind chill and water or rain or snow, all of those things, they wet you and they basically seep all of your body heat away. So what you want to do is then find a way to get yourself out of the wind and out of the rain. Are you stealing firewood? So that you can manage to regulate your own body temperature. So in that instance, I would say yes, shelter. The other extreme of that is desert survival, where you find yourself so exposed to the sun that water is not even nearly a priority because you're losing moisture so fast from your body because the sun is actually just draining you. What do you want? Here's a stick.
Some muscles.
Yeah, you can have an outside toy. So if you find yourself in the desert where you're losing so much moisture from your body because of the sun, then water again isn't going to be your first priority. It's going to be retaining what moisture you've got in your body. So again, it's going to be shelter rather than water. In an instance where, for example, you're in a forest and you're quite well sheltered from, let's say, the wind and from the elements, but there isn't a water source anywhere nearby, you're going to need to prioritize water. In some instances, navigation is going to trump water, because in order to find water, you might need to be able to navigate. So I did a video on navigating to find water. Quite interestingly, if you are in the southern hemisphere, the sun passes east to west, but it passes due north of us in the southern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, it's the opposite way around. So what happens is it casts shadows on the southern side of mountains or of hills or so on. So if you're able to navigate, then you can navigate to water, because the water is going to remain or be retained on the southern slopes a lot more than on the northern slopes. So then your first priority is actually going to be navigation, so that you can find water, because if you can determine where north and south is, you're going to more readily find water. So in some instances, it might be navigation above water. When does water become a priority then, is the question that you ask. Yes, water is a very high priority. Water is a higher priority than food, but I would say shelter in most instances is a higher priority than what water is. So you would most likely try to build yourself a place to stay overnight first, depending on the time of day as well. If you're lost in the morning and you've got lots of time, then don't worry about building a shelter until you see you've got maybe 2 hours of daylight left. Then think about shelter, think about fire. And then as you go as well, you can collect resources for fire making. So fire helps us to purify water, it helps us to cook food, it helps us to keep warm, it helps us to improve our mentality a little bit, especially if you've got to stay somewhere strange overnight. A fire can really make a difference to your mentality. But those things are only really important here at the end of the day. So when I do think water is important, is give yourself at least a couple of hours to just navigate, find where you are, build a shelter, or treat the necessary injuries that need to be treated. And as you go along, you might actually end up finding water without even looking for it. And the same goes for food. But in all instances of survival resources, as you move, try to collect those things, or try to make mental notes of where you saw there might have been an old spring or a stream, or it might even be a dry riverbed. So that if you don't find water later on, you know where there was a dry riverbed, and that's going to be the most likely place that you can dig for water. So all of these things need to be going through your mind constantly. As far as survival really goes, I think the crux of survival really is your mentality. You can be the most skilled survivalist if you don't have the right mentality. If you give up quickly, if you become frustrated quickly, or you become frazzled quickly, you're going to have a really hard time making decisions. And if you can't make decisions properly, then what's going to happen is you're going to end up not being able to decide what your highest priority is in any
staying
instance.
Alive.
And I make myself
And
some coffee here.
We work backwards.
I'm actually going to try tea for today.
Yeah. Okay, I have to stay alive. What do I have to do to stay alive? That's a good starting point.
This is actually water here.
Because then you are able to identify.
I've been lost in the wilderness before, where we ended up spending an extra night because we had just taken the wrong trail. And then you're already out of food because you've planned, let's say, for a 5-day hike, and now you end up staying 6 days. So you're already at the end of your food on day 5, and then you end up staying a 6th day.
You run out of food, you still have to talk.
Most people don't have resources, they don't have food,
Chinese.
You're tired, you are now disappointed because you don't get to go home. People are worried about you because they expected you back and you're not back. It becomes a very stressful situation.
Always tell
and here's the thing about a survival mentality.
It's
actually something that you can practice in your everyday life. What you implement in order to problem solve everyday life issues is what's going to come through when you're in a crisis situation. How do I say this now? If you're able to take a step back in everyday life and calm yourself down, take an objective look at the situation, step back from it, don't be emotional, and you can problem solve really well in everyday life, you can practice those skills so that if you ever end up being somewhere in the wilderness where maybe you're lost, or maybe you find yourself in a bug out scenario where you've had to leave your home, whether that be because of a flood or civil unrest or some other reason, if you're used to problem solving by taking a step back and trying to be objective about the situation that you're in, you're going to be able to transfer that skill to a survival situation as well. So it's really good to practice that in everyday life. And it might be something silly like getting a flat tire somewhere where you're not comfortable with stopping and you need to problem solve really quickly. Try to stay calm and focused and objective in that moment, because it's good practice for real survival situations. Hunter agrees. If you have a hard time focusing and problem solving in everyday life, it really helps to ground and center yourself in the Word of God. Matthew 4 verse 4 says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every spoken word of God." And that's because we need to be able to bring problems to God, and we need to have a relationship with Him so that He can help us to problem solve the things that we face in everyday life. So that you don't feel that you're just trying to live off of your own resources, you're not trying to do things out of your own capacity and your own abilities, but that you're able to bring things to God to help you with. My water has boiled. Oh, that is hot though.
Well, giving up means dying.
Okay. Like I said earlier in this video, in the long run, your survival needs may be different from your needs initially. So you might find that you've got a water source to start with initially, but it's not enough to sustain you long term. So maybe you found a puddle of water, or you can drink some of the water out of the proteas, which is really nice, by the way. So it's got like a really sweet taste. But it's not enough to clean wounds with, it's not enough to wash yourself with. And for fire making purposes, maybe in the short term, you've got some fire making materials that will help you to make fire for, I don't know, maybe a month. Maybe you've got a lighter that's got a little bit of lighter gas or lighter fluid in it, but it's not going to last you long term.
Big problem.
So if you find that you're in a survival situation long term, you're going to start needing to harvest materials to start making a bow drill kit, and that's when we start getting into primitive survival. Because you need to ensure that once you've made a fire, you can continue to make fires every day, because you're going to need to boil your water. So in the short run, you might need to find water for a start, or maybe you need to just conserve the resources that you've got. Maybe you stumble across a puddle of water and you can harvest some water from it, but that's not going to help you in the long term. You need to find a perennial water source that can sustain you for longer periods of time, because you're going to end up needing water to clean wounds. Injuries are inevitable in the wilderness. I actually have one just from chopping wood earlier. One of the pieces of wood actually flew out, and now I've got like a bruise here. I'm going to have such a big blowhole. But anyway, so you need to start thinking differently for long-term survival than what you do for short-term survival. For long-term survival, you're going to need a shelter that gives you a sense of home and a sense of belonging.
You should
not
really
just a
try
place
to
that will
avoid.
keep you out of the elements. That's going to last maybe a week. So something like a cave where you've managed to like close off part of the entrance of the cave, or a hollow in a rock face or something like that, becomes a better shelter than your initial little debris shelter is. A debris shelter is great for day 1, day 2, maybe day 3. If you build a solid debris shelter, it might last you, I don't
Depending
know,
on the
a week
environment,
or 2, but you're going to have to constantly rebuild that shelter. And if the weather changes or the direction of the wind and the water changes, is it sufficient to actually keep you dry and warm? So for long-term survival, you need a much more solid shelter that gives you a sense of place, of going home to, somewhere that you can feel safe as well. In the long run, you might also need to expand the space in which you forage. So I'm sitting in a pine forest here. There's a whole lot of pine cones around. So immediately I've got pine nuts available to me. So there's some source of food, but I can't live off of pine nuts.
The dog.
So I'm definitely going to have to start trapping. I'm definitely going to have to start looking for small animals to eat, or small
if it comes down to it,
that you can eat.
you may have to
are
kill
a
your
wonderful source of protein as well. So
keeps
things
you
like
alive.
that, but you can't in the immediate vicinity harvest all of the food and think that it's going to be sustainable. You're going to need to move around a bit like a nomad, so that you get food sources. And also the animals start to realize that there's a human presence in the area. And very quickly hunting becomes difficult, or trapping becomes difficult, because all of the animals start to move away from wherever you are, especially if you're making fires or making a noise like this guy. If you found value in this video, remember to hit like and subscribe. Follow me on the social media channels. There's a lot of the everyday live ready stuff on TikTok and on Instagram. And until the next time, live ready. What do you want? You've got water. You can't have tea.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. What do you think about this video? Well, it depends all on the situation, and it is up to you and your skills to see what you have to do in which situation. Yeah, I could have said it in 15 seconds. Yeah, but she's nice to look at. Yeah, well, if you have liked this video, press the like button, press the subscribe button, and all of these buttons. I give her a like, cause if I don't hate a video, I give it a like. Yeah, let me stop this here, and I'll see you next time here at the Adventurers Club.